Okay, so this is a briefing that I was invited to give by Bob, and I'm going to break it down into a number of parts. It'll kick off with me just explaining who I am, where I fit into this. Then we'll start looking at what I call the four bridges, because this talk is actually about some of the more unusual things that went on in the Italian campaign. Most people know the routine stuff, where divisions went, but what are some of the more bizarre things and the things that actually I find fascinating? We'll also then move on to what I call the four characters, four personalities who featured in the Italian campaign, all of whom are, in my view, extraordinary. And maybe you'll agree. Once I've done that, we'll have a summary and give you a chance for questions. So you can save those questions for the end. That'd be great. So who am I? Well, that's me, right up on Snake's Head Ridge above the Aviat Casino with a group. And I've been to casino 261 times. I'm an obsessive. I started there because I'm a colonel of infantry. And in the British Army, the army run battlefield studies. And I started doing that as a young captain and carried it right through to when I retired. And I focused on the Italian campaign largely because it'd been neglected. Most people focus on the N word, Normandy, or the Battle of the Bulge, and Italy has been largely ignored. And yet it lasted longer and was more painful than Normandy and Northwestern Europe. So I've always been fascinated by it, and it is an incredible campaign. In the course of that research, you come across all sorts of fascinating people and fascinating things. And I want to share some of those with you. And the first one is going to be all about what's called the Alerona Bridge, an incident that took place on the 28th of January 1944, effectively an accident and a terrible misfortune. So something's happened here. What's that popping up? Let me just bring that back. Then, having done that, I'm going to move on to the Amazon Bridge, probably the most famous bridge in British Royal Engineer history, immortalized in a painting in 1969 by a British painter called Terence Cuneo, although his family originated from Italy. And then I'll move on to the Kingsmill Bridge. What happens when you're faced with a problem and you put people's mind to work to produce a solution? The Kingsmill Bridge is equally fascinating. And my favorite, the Impossible Bridge. It's a bridge over the River Morrow near Ortona, and it was something that came out of nowhere. It was originally designed to get the Germans to think one way, and in the end, they ended up building it and using it. And we'll hear all about that. It's fascinating. So, Alerona. If you don't know where Alerona is, you can see on this map right in the center there, Rome, and it's to the north of Rome, 85 miles north of Rome, and just 11 miles north of a little place called Orvieto. And it was here that on the 28th of January, 1944, 320 bombardment group from the United States Air Force bombed the already damaged Ponte Ortona Bridge over the Rapaglia near Alerona. And they came in 5 waves. You say, well, what's so special about that? It's all part of Operation Strangle. The Americans and the Brits are bombing everything that moves, particularly anything to do with comms, to try and stop the Germans bringing equipment and ammunition and people down from the north. So what's so unusual about it? Well, what's unusual is actually a tragedy, because on that bridge at the time was a train carrying between 800 and 900 Allied prisoners of war who just left, and it's marked on the map, the Italian prisoner of war camp PG-54 at a place called Fara in Sabina, which is to the south of Vieto and to the north of Rome. And they were taken down to the railway station and put on a train, and their destination was Germany, where they're going to make Messerschmitts and dig holes. And the train itself on that bridge, it was made up of cattle trucks, and each cattle truck had about 40 men in it. And a lot of those prisoners of war had been captured in mid-January during the 10th British Corps operation to cross the Garigliano right back near Cassino. So that operation took place on the night of the 17th, 18th of January. A lot of British were captured, taken to PG-54, and they're now destined for Germany and on this train. To this day, no one knows for certain just how many died, but the estimate is somewhere between 200 and 600. The official log of the 320th Bombardment Group reported, and I'll read it to you because it's fascinating, at 10:50 hours, 28 B-26s of the 320th Bombardment Group took off from Sardinia to bomb the Orvieto Railroad Bridge, North Italy. They were unescorted. One B-26 returned early because of engine problems. The remainder went and reached their target. And the remaining 27 dropped 84 1,000-pound demolition bombs, all on delayed fuses. And very importantly, 36 500-pound demolition bombs on 18 to 12-hour delay fuses. And they were designed to cause havoc, of course, when the Germans come back and want to repair the bridge. They did it from 11,000 feet, and 25 of the original 28 returned safely to Sardinia. The remainder had to stop on their way, particularly in Corsica, to refuel. And the results are, and this is I quote from the American Diary, an excellent concentration of bombs bracketed the bridge with direct hits at the south and completely destroying two spans. 100 feet of the bridge has been wiped out. One train of between 40 and 50 cars is standing across the bridge in an arc. We destroy, we think, 10 cars, we derailed 3, and the remainder remained on the track. Now, an Italian priest at the time, a Don Marzio Michetti, he was a priest from the local village, which I'll show you in a second. He wrote, "The first raid and the second, with the accompanying rush of air and the flying debris, was responsible straight away for about 200 deaths. The third attack made a direct hit on the train and the bridge, splitting it into 3 pieces. The fourth raid, made with delayed action bombs, brought the number of dead to around 400. A considerable number of men were wounded, for the most part lightly, with about 300 reported no injuries at all. The dead, around 300, between the British, blacks, Algerians, and French, were laid in a massive grave in the bomb craters. I wanted to transfer them to Orvieto Cemetery, was not allowed to do so by the Germans. The 100 Germans who also died in the attack were buried in the same way in those craters. And I arrived at the scene after about 5 minutes and wanted to make a list of all the prisoners, but a German lieutenant holding a pistol refused permission to me. Later bombings, which took place between February and May, destroyed the resting place of these victims, and now there's nothing to be seen except a few bones and the remnants of prisoners' clothing. In effect, the bridge received a direct hit in the first wave, and 3 trucks in the center of the column were burnt out, and you can see those 3 trucks on that arch. So, pretty grim stuff. You can see there the Germans have now come back because they need to get this bridge over the main railway back into place. Serious damage had been done to the bridge, and workmen were brought in to carry out repairs organized by the incredible German TOT organization. The TOT organization itself, even at Cassino, had 40,000 press gangs Italians working for them. It's an enormous organization providing labor to the German army. Their job is to get this railway line back up and running because, of course, the Germans want to bring down their heavy armor from the north. Amongst these laborers, was an Italian called Latino Pesieri, who didn't know exactly what had happened, but in the darkness had been able to pick out several wagons which were lying on the riverbed. And it was obvious to him what had happened in the bombing raid. All became clearer when he went under the bridge to collect some stone, and there was human remains absolutely everywhere, and the inside of the ruined wagons were covered in blood. Here, now showing you on the screen, is the event described by a soldier who was on that train, Lance Corporal Adams. And so he writes home, and you can look carefully, you'll be able to see, I escaped as these bombs did not hit the train, but blew the door off the truck open at the bottom, and we managed to scramble. We found out that the doors had been locked by the Germans and sealed with wire. So effectively, the blast saved these guys' lives because it opened the doors. He managed to escape the carnage and he scrambled out of his truck and he survived. One of the lucky ones. This is a picture of the new bridge because it was rebuilt and this is taken in the year 2010. And in the distance, just under one of the arches, you can see the town where the priest came from. Monte Rubio Michele, how would you say that? You're on mute.
Sorry,
Mon,
could you repeat?
Monte Rubia Giallo.
Monterubia Giallo. So it's okay.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So you can see the town, and that's where the priest came from. He came down to see that, and you can now see the modern railway that's there as well. Which itself, as you can see on this picture, I've marked it in the red rectangle because the new bridge is the one slightly to the right, where you can see the memorial picture. In fact, the whole thing was completely battered. And so after the war, they rebuilt the bridge to the right of the aerial photograph that you can see. But if you look very carefully in the river, you can see the two bridge abutments. And if you look carefully north and south of those abutments, you can make out the line of the original railway. So it's all still there. The bodies were buried underneath those two arches, so they are still somewhere in the river. Fortunately for us, this event hasn't passed. It's been commemorated, and the memorial was installed on the 28th of January 2012, exactly the day that the incident happened, way back in 1944. So it's not been forgotten. And you can see by the photograph, some school children designed it, and then it was built in steel. It's a railway with the railway carriages in that cube. And the railway continues afterwards. Quite a moving memorial. And if you look behind on the wall, you can see some of the railway girders that were found in the excavation. So that's the Alarona Bridge. Pretty grim stuff. Do we hold the Americans responsible? No. This is war. And those airmen did what they were supposed to do, which is try and stop German movement south to support the Gustav line at Cassino. So moving on then to the next one, the Amazon Bridge. The Amazon Bridge, for those who've never seen it, is right down at Cassino. And it was a moment of British engineer genius. I'll talk you through it. Here in this photograph, you can see three crossings. The Congo crossing, Blackwater crossing, and the Amazon. And then just ignore the ferry for the moment. This crossing, or these crossings, these three crossings, they were to support the 4th British Infantry Division, who were to assault the river on a very narrow front, 2 brigades up. On the left, 28 Brigade, and on the right, 10 Brigade, with 12 Brigade in reserve, and they were going to ready to go through whichever bridge got across first, and then swing right and link up with the Poles who will be doing their work up on 593, overlooking the monastery. For this to happen, for these 3 bridges to go in, 7 Field Company, they were allocated Congo, the one on the left, 28 Brigade. On the right, 225 Field Company were allocated to 10 Brigade, Amazon. And in the centre, 59 Field Company allocated to 12 Brigade. They were in reserve, but they were going to build Blackwater. So each of the assaulting companies on the left, Congo, and on the right, Amazon, were going to put in Class 40 Bailey bridges for armour. And in the centre, 5-9 would build Blackwater a class 9. That was really to bring back the empties. So empty vehicles and most importantly, casualties. So that was the plan. Left tank bridge, right tank bridge, center empties bridge. On the night of the 11th of May, the battle started. On the left, 28th Brigade get across, but they stall. On the right, 10 Brigade get across, but they stall. And in stalling, none of the bridges are built, not one. So by the morning of the 12th of May, Congo's not in, Blackwater's not in, and Amazon's not in. The front is stalling. And it takes a moment of engineer genius to solve the problem. The Commander of Royal Engineers, so the chap who's running engineers at division, who's in charge of these 3 field companies, says, gentlemen, gather round. We were supposed to build Congo, Blackwater, and Amazon. We're now going to focus entirely on Amazon. And our 3 companies will build Amazon until we die. It's as simple as that. And so they spend the morning and the afternoon of the 12th getting everything into position. Because that night, they're going to build Amazon. And it starts with 225, who were the original builders of Amazon. They know the bridge layout, they know the ground, they will kick off. The Royal Northumberland Fusiliers bring down the bridging equipment and they start to build as soon as it gets dark. And it goes relatively well until we have our first disaster. At the bridge headquarters, an ammunition truck turns up and a German round hits the ammunition truck, blows it up. And of course, that silhouettes the bridge building down on the river. And the Germans now realize, aha, so this is where they're building the bridge. And they start to shell the bridge crossing point. And 225 soldiers start falling like 9 pins. That causes a lot of grief. And so the Commander of Royal Engineers says, right, pull out 225, bring in 5-9. So 5-9 come down and they continue to build the bridge into the night. And then they have the next disaster. Up on the hill behind them, there's an enormous haystack, and that catches fire. And in catching fire, it once again silhouettes the soldiers who are building the bridge, the chaps from 5-9. And the Germans realize, they haven't stopped building it. And they bring down more and more artillery and start knocking 5-9 down with 9 pins. That is going okay, but the commander then realizes, I'm starting to run out of men and I'm starting to run out of momentum. Take out 5-9, bring in 7, the last throw of his dice. And at 5 o'clock in the morning, the boys are, as you can see in the picture, they're starting to push the bridge into place. And then we have a disaster. That bulldozer pushing the bridge into place, and it can only be done with a bulldozer. It's an enormous bridge. Suddenly conks out. An artillery shell has blown its radiator and the sump, the oil sump. And so it grinds to a halt. This is at 5 o'clock in the morning. Oh my God, what are we going to do now? The sun's about to come up. And Major Daniel from 5-9 remembers hearing in a briefing there were some tanks around there. So he says to one of his sappers, his young soldiers, go back and find me a tank. Bring me a tank. And so the sapper goes and finds the armor, which is about 300 meters away, bangs on the cupola of the tank and says to the young Mr. Wayne, Mr. Wayne, sir, would you bring your tank to us? And a 17th 21st Lancer tank from A Squadron comes up to the bridge, and it's a Lancer tank that pushes the bridge into place. And the wonderful thing about this picture is this is actually an engineer lie. They're not pushing the bridge into place at all. It was a 17th 21st Lancer bridge that pushed it into place. But we can't have that in an engineer picture. And Bob, in his wisdom, recognized that and has built for me an exact replica of the model, except that he's removed the the bulldozer and he's put in Mr. Wayne's 1721st Lancer tank, pushing the bridge into place. The bridge goes in, and at 5:30 in the morning, the first squadron of 17th 21st Lancers goes over the bridge, turns right, and joins up with the infantry of 10 Brigade on the other side, and the rest is history. The battle can progress. An amazing achievement by the Royal Engineers. Moving on to the third one, I talked about Kingsmill and how the exigencies of war. We're stuck, we've got a problem, what are we going to do about it? And Kingsmill is going to take place on the same night as Congo and Amazon are supposed to be built. But Kingsmill is actually in the division to the left of the 4th Division. The original plan was that the 8th Indian would be on the left, the 4th British, the ones we just looked at, would be on the right. They were faced with the same problem. How do we get our armour across the bridge? And they faced three problems. Firstly, the Indian engineers were very, very short of bridging material. The British 4th Indian had plenty, but the engineers in the Indian army, they were short. The second problem, and the biggest problem that drove this, was that the Germans held a line only 300 meters back from the river. So if you're going to start building bridges, you're going to have a problem. And the third problem was that Bailey bridges are prefabricated sections of steel that need to be assembled on site. So if you've got Germans firing at you from 300 meters away, it's not very popular with engineers. And the staff started to scratch their head about how they're going to solve this problem, because a conventional Bailey bridge a la Amazon was going to be very complicated. And a young captain called Tony Kingsmill, who was a Royal Canadian electrical and mechanical engineer, and he was the officer commanding the Light Aid Detachment of the Calgary Regiment, the armoured regiment that was going to throw its tanks across the river. He came up with a solution, and it was a very, very clever solution. And you can see it in the picture. In effect, he's going to build a Bailey Bridge elsewhere, and he's going to mount it onto a Sherman tank with a turret removed. And then, as you can see at the back there on the right, he's going to use the other tank to simply push it into the water. How clever is that? And there you can see the design. You can see how you've got the Sherman at the back on the left in the top part of the picture. You can see the Bailey Bridge, and you can see how it's on rollers, and you can see what happens. They push it into the river. The Sherman that's got no turret sinks, and the bridge is in. On the early the dusk of the 12th of May, in goes Kingsmill. He personally escorts the two pieces of armor and the bridge down to the river, and they get it in. And by dawn, the first squadron of the Calgary Regiment gets across. So we now have 15 Sherman tanks on the far side supporting the 3rd, 8th Punjabs. This has unlocked. Now, unfortunately, the Germans realize what's going on and they shell the bridge, and the armor stuck on the other side. But at least we've got armor on the other side. It's an incredible achievement. Most importantly, we've got armor now knocking 7 bells of shit out of the Germans and causing havoc. Dear old Kingsmill. For this act alone, not so much the design of the bridge, but more his personal act, he's awarded the Military Cross. And what's wonderful about the Kingsmill Bridge is the Canadians recognise the achievement. And as you can see there, right next to the crossing point is the Kingsmill Bridge Memorial, which is wonderful. Incredible achievement. My fourth and last bridge is called the Impossible Bridge. And it's a fascinating story of people thinking rather like Kingsmill outside the box. If you look at the map that I'm putting up now, you will see a circle. And you'll see that right bang in the middle of the circle is the River Morrow. And in effect, what's happening is the British, the Canadians, and the New Zealanders are advancing from the south, to the north. On the Adriatic side, because this is December 1943, the 1st Canadian Infantry and the 2nd New Zealanders are ordered to take up the lead in 5 Corps, with 8th Indian Division in the centre in a more or less static role, largely because they're worn out. So the 78th British have done their job and the Indians have done their job. So we're going to bring through and push the 1st Canadians on the right towards Ortona and the 2nd New Zealand Division on the left towards Ausonia. And the 8th Indian will go into the centre, but they'll, as I say, will be more or less static. They're there to persuade the Germans that they've got 3 divisions in front of them, whereas in fact only 2 will be doing the fighting. And in order to convince the Germans that the 8th Division was a threat, rather than trying to rest and recover from the butchery they've had over the last 3 months, they decide on a piece of deceit. But that deceit's got to be tangible. It's got to be real. There's no point in just waving at them from the far bank. And so this is what the Tiger Triumph says, which is the sort of acknowledged history of the Indian divisions in Italy. He said a convincing deception would be to build a bridge over the river Moro in the 8th Indian Division sector, and to build it at such a place and in such a manner that the enemy could not choose but believe it to be meant for actual use. So we're going to build a bridge to convince the Germans that the 8th Indian Division is still in the battle. A reconnaissance of the Moro banks revealed a point at which a right-angled bend in the road made it impossible site from which to launch a bridge from the south bank. So the bank that they're on. Argued Lieutenant Colonel C.M. McLachlan, commander of the divisional sappers, if it is impossible to build a bridge from the near bank, why not build it backwards from the enemy bank? Thereafter, if the Germans discover it, they will be certain that we needed this crossing really badly. If they do not discover it, we might well surprise them by using it. Thus originated the project which became famous as the Impossible Bridge, says the Tiger Triumphs. The area surrounding the bridge site was extremely active. German fighting patrols often crossed to the south bank of the Moro looking for trouble, and they could find our bridge. So the idea is to build a bridge and convince them that the 8th Indian are in the game, so that they're facing 3 divisions, not 2. The difficulty, because this wasn't actually conceived to take place, was that the 2nd New Zealanders on the left at Ausonia very quickly run into trouble. Ausonia is brutal. They have a terrible, terrible time there. And on the right, the Canadians also come up against strong German opposition. So this front is stalling. With the divisions had established bridgeheads over the Moro, but what beyond the Moro is what gave them so much trouble. And in order to concentrate their strength and allow them to push on, the 1st Canadians came back to the 8th Indian and said, look, is there any chance you can help us take a bit of heat off us by doing something in your sector? Because at the moment you're sitting there not doing anything. And the campaign in Italy, the official history of the whole campaign, records with a stalemate on the front of the 2nd New Zealand Division and the Canadians making only slow progress on the right flank, the time had come for the 8th Indian Division to lend a hand and not remain static. It was decided that the 21st Infantry Indian Brigade would cross the River Moro and attack the Calderi feature to draw Germans away from both the Canadian and the New Zealand sector. The principal obstacle to a full-scale attack across the Moro was the difficulty of getting either tanks or anti-tank guns over the stream to support any infantry that's sent across. The crossing used by the 44th Royal Tank Regiment had been impassable. So as far as the Impossible Bridge was concerned, the narrowness of the approaches to the bridge, the lack of parking space for vehicles, and the constant shelling and heavy fire from mortars and machine guns made its construction a hazardous operation. So, what are we going to do? We need to bring in the 8th Indian, How are we going to do it? Well, McCracken goes back to his original plan and says, got a plan for you, sir. We're going to build a bridge backwards. We're going to build it from the German bank. So on the night of the 8th, 9th of December, protected by 3 strong fighting patrols, pushed out over onto the far bank, 69 Indian Field Company crossed the river, swept the approaches for mines, brought all their bridging material across by hand, and cut the steps into the bank to allow them to start to build the bank. And at dawn on the 9th of December, the Mahatras dragged across their anti-tank guns, the 17-pounders, and a squadron from 50 Royal Tank Regiment moved up on the friendly bank to cover the build. They were building this thing literally under the noses of the Germans. That started in the early morning and was completed by 1800 on the 9th, the same night. And that night, the 3rd 15th Punjabs, with all its support weapons, crossed the Morro to establish a bridgehead. And after that came the magic bit, the armour. We've got armour across the Morro to support the Kiwis on our left and the Canadians on our right. And it worked because, of course, the Germans were drawn to deal with the 8th Indian Division. So 4 fascinating bridges that feature little stories all of their own inside the Italian campaign. But those are actual things that happen. What about people? Because the Italian campaign is full of characters and personalities. Let's talk about some of them. First guy I want to tell you all about is a chap called Admiral Sir Walter Cowan, DSO and Bar. So he's got 2 distinguished service orders. That's no mean feat. I want to talk to you about Major Sir William Dugdale, Military Cross. He served in the Grenadier Guards. At the Admiral, of course, was the Royal Navy. The third guy I want to tell you about is Lieutenant C.R. Milne, who was a Royal Engineer in 220 Field Company in 56th Division. And the third guy, the looniest of them all, Lieutenant Colonel Jack Churchill, DSO and Bar and MC and Bar. That's 4 gallantry medals. And British, for those who served in the British Army, know that the British Army do not give away gallantry medals lightly. So, who are these people? Admiral Sir Walter Cowan. What a guy. There he is, look, on the left. And then it's him later on as Colonel of an Indian cavalry regiment. And I'll cover that story in a second. This is Sir Walter Henry Cowan, 1st Baronet, DSO and Bar. He was born in 1871, and he was a Royal Naval officer who saw service in both the First World War and the Second World War. He was no slouch. In the 1890s, he saw action in the Mahdist War, and he fought at the Battle of Omdurman, the last British cavalry charge of last cavalry ever. He then commanded the entire Nile gunboat flotilla during the Fashoda incident. He then went on to the Second Boer War, where he was aide-de-camp to both Lord Kitchener and then Lord Roberts. And in the 1900s, he worked with a chap called Roger Keyes. I'll come back to Roger very shortly. He commanded the 26,000-ton Princess Royal at the Battle of Jutland, where he served alongside Roger Keyes, who worked for him. In 1919, his 1st Light Cruiser Squadron was sent to the Baltic Sea, and his mission was to keep the sea lanes open for the new republics of Finland, Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania, who were all threatened by the new Soviet Russia. And he finally retires in 1931. And that's where the story gets interesting. So he's had a long, extensive naval career, and he retires. Well, in 1941, he gets a phone call from his friend Roger Keyes. Roger Keyes is now heading up the new organization called the Royal Marines Commandos. And he says to Admiral Sir Walter Cowan, "Sir, um, would you mind coming to Scotland to help me train my soldiers in dinghy sailing?" And Cowan says, "Well, I'd love to, boy, but I can't. I'm an admiral. I'd happily drop down to a much lower rank, so I'm not an embarrassment. Would commander do?" So that's full colonel in sorry, lieutenant colonel in army language. And Key says, "I can do that for you, sir." So he drops down to being commander. He goes to Scotland, and in effect, he never leaves. Wherever the Royal Marines commandos go, he goes. He goes out to North Africa with them, and he serves them there. And he fought in the Second Battle of Machili in April 1941. He was there. And the Second Battle of Machili in April 1941 makes him 72 years old. He also takes part in two abortive seaborne raids by number 8 Commando along the North Egyptian coast. He is quite a character. He gets captured at the Battle of Bir Hakim, and while he was captured, or before he was captured, he detached himself, because he can do that because he's 73, to the 18th King Edward's Own Cavalry, an Indian cavalry regiment. He was captured in May 1942, having fought an Italian tank crew single-handedly, armed only with a revolver. Now, he was 73 by now, so the Italians, being sensible, did a prisoner exchange. 800 Italian seamen were exchanged for a whole lot of Brits, which included Admiral Sir Walter Cowan, age 73. And you'd think, well, he's had enough now, he wants to go home. None of it. He decides, I'm going to rejoin the commandos. And so he is now in number 2 Commando. And number 2 Commando land at Salerno. He does that Salerno operation with them. And he comes to my notice because I was making a TV program called My Grandparents' War about a chap called Catesby. And Catesby, if you know your British history, was one of the main protagonists in the gunpowder plot. And Catesby's great, great, great grandson was Maurice Catesby, who won a military cross supporting the 2nd Commando Brigade in the Battle of Ornito in the high mountains below Cassino. And his own grandson is Kit Harington. That was the program we were making. Kit Harington, if you've ever watched the Game of Thrones, he is Jon Snow. He is one of the main characters. So in doing all the research for this Kit Harington and Catesby, I discover Sir Walter Cowan. And he's awarded a 2nd DSO, so a bar to his DSO, for, and I quote, "gallantry, determination, and undaunted devotion to duty as a liaison officer with 2 Commando in the attack and the capture of Monte Ornito, and later on the attack on Faito, 2 enormous mountains between Cassino and the sea." So age 74, he is humping ammunition up the hill for the boys. And I've walked that whole hill, and it's hard work. And I was only about 60 at the time. I found it hard work. How a 74-year-old did it? He's very impressed. Anyway, he finally retires with his 2 DSOs in 1945. And after the war, he's invited to become the honorary colonel of the 18th King Edward's, the 7th Own Cavalry, the cavalry that he was caught with in May 1941, April 1942, sorry, 42, sorry. And he visited India, and there's a picture of him in his colonel of the regiment's uniform, to receive the post, which he considered the greatest he had attained in his extensive military career. He died in 1956, aged 85. Admiral Sir Walter Cowan, DSO and Bar. The next chap I want to tell you about is another incredible character called Major Sir William Dugdale. And here he is as a captain in the 5th Battalion of the Grenadier Guards. And at the Battle of Anzio, he wins a military cross on the night of the 8th, 9th of February, in the same action that Philip Sidney wins his Victoria Cross. And the Philip Sidney incident is around his ability to stop the Germans, and in stopping the Germans, he effectively rescues the Anzio beachhead, because if the Germans had got through, that would be the end. In the same incident, William Dugdale wins a military cross, but that's not his brilliance. His brilliance is, and I discovered this in his book, Settling the Bill, And Sir William Dugdale was a real character. In the 1970s, he was chairman of Aston Villa Football Club when they won the European Cup in the 1980s. He was quite a character. But the story I want to tell you that I love the most took place in September 1944 when he's been promoted from captain to major. And he's now Major Sir William Dugdale, commanding a company, a rifle company of the 5th Grenadier Guards up in the north in the Apennines, just beyond Florence. And the boys have been on compo, so that's MREs for you Americans. They've been on compo for 3 months and they're all bunged up. Their bottoms are absolutely bunged up. And they stopped the night in an orchard, a plum orchard, ready for the attack at 9 o'clock the next morning. And the boys, of course, have never seen fresh fruit for a while, so they spend the night gorging themselves on these plums. And in the morning, the company sergeant major goes and sees Major Dugdale and says, "Sir, I'm terribly sorry, but the soldiers aren't going to be able to attack this morning. They've got the screaming shits." Company sergeant major, remind the soldiers that we are grenadiers. We go into the attack on time. Order them now to remove their trousers and underwear. We will go into the attack without trousers and underwear. And so at 9 o'clock in the morning, in go the company of grenadiers, all pooing themselves as they go. Imagine yourself as a German, firing back, thinking, why have I got so many Englishmen coming at me with no trousers on? Sir William Dugdale, extraordinary character. And by the way, they won that attack. The next chap I want to tell you about is this chap, and I kept it deliberately as his initials, Lieutenant C.R. Milne. And here he is, Christopher Robin Milne. I was doing some research on the 56th British Division's crossing of the Garigliano, the one that I mentioned earlier in January 1944, where all those chaps were captured and eventually killed on the Alorona Bridge. And I discovered this. And it's a drawing of Lieutenant C.R. Milne's design for the bridge over the Garigliano. He's a young lieutenant, he's a reconnaissance officer, and he's gone forward to the river and he's come back with a design for a bridge. And I thought, C.R. Milne, I recognize that name. And of course, you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, C.R. Milne. Christopher Robin Milne is of the Winnie the Pooh fame. Now, interestingly, he loathed the fact that his father, A.A. Milne, had included him in the books. And his company used to call him the boy, and he hated that too. Eventually, he rejected anything to do with Winnie the Pooh, and he gave all the rights to the Great Ormond Street Hospital in London. He absolutely abhorred anything to do with Winnie the Pooh. So he was in the Italian campaign, and bless him, survived. Which brings me to my last character, a true and utter lunatic called Jack Churchill. And as I said earlier, DSO and Bar, MC and Bar, 4 gallantry medals. 4. That is going some. And the action that I'm going to describe, he was actually recommended for the Victoria Cross, but he didn't get it. He got a second DSO. Here he is. Here's the lunatic. He was the last British officer to kill a German with a longbow. He killed a German at Dunkirk with a longbow. And he was a British officer who believed that every British officer should go into battle carrying a sword. And so he did. But his brilliant story is one that happened at Salerno. You can see a map here. And on it, you can see the date, the 15th, 16th of September, because in the previous 2 days, the 14th and 15th, the Germans have captured the place that's on the top, or middle left, right-hand side, Piediolele. And they've dug themselves in on the 3 features, starting from the left, the crag, White Cross Hill, and the Pimple. And they own Piediolele and the hill behind it, 339. So they own that feature. And the disaster for the British is that hill, all those series of hills that they're on, enjoy fabulous views of the 10th British Corps part of the beachhead. They can see the British unloading their stores on the beach. and in the port of Salona, the bits that they've opened. It's a disaster for the British because that means that the Germans can control their artillery from any one of these features and bring it down very accurately onto the British in the port. 28th Brigade have tried to get it back and they failed. And so it's the turn of number 2 Commando and 41 Commando, who form part of what's called Ley Force. They've had a battering further up in the La Molina Pass. They're now at rest in a place called Mercatello, which is down on the beach. And they've been assured that they're going to get 5 days rest. Well, because 128 Infantry Brigade fail, the divisional commander turns to Ley Force and says, sorry, mate, you're back into the battle. We'd like you to capture Piediolele and the 3 features of the Crag, White Cross Hill, and the Pimple. Get on with it. And they were going to do that as what's called a reconnaissance in force. They're going to go take everything with them, beat the hell out of the Germans, and then hand over, in this case, to 169 Infantry Brigade, who would then hold the ground. So the plan, and it's shown on the chart there, starting on the left, is for 2 Commando to drive straight for the Pimple. And on the left and on the right, the remainder of their force would drive on Piediolele. On their right, 41 Commando would come up on their right and capture point 339, which then subsequently became known as 41 Commando Hill. Well, that night, the commandos do their job. They get up onto 41 Commando Hill. And this is where Churchill comes into his own. He thinks his boys are tired. They are, they're exhausted. And so he says to one of his corporals, he says, I can't remember the corporal now, let's look it up. Where's my corporal gone? Corporal Ruffell. Corporal Ruffell, what are you doing? Not a lot, sir. Right, come with me. And out in front of the commando, the 2 Commando, his unit, he goes with Corporal Ruffell, and he goes into Piediolele and he finds an anti-tank unit. And the first thing he does is he arrests them. And he then gets the remainder of the troops, the Germans, to take him round Piediolele, all the sentries, and he rounds them up. And he disarms them, takes the bolt out of the rifle, lets them have their rifle, and he forces them down the hill. And the commanders coming up from the bottom, because he's way ahead of them, all think they're being attacked by Germans. And he has to say, stop, 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 stop. No, they're all disarmed. He captures Piediolele by himself and hands it over to 169 Infantry Brigade, him and Corporal Ruffell. And for that action, he's awarded his 2nd DSO. Quite a character. So in summary then, hopefully I've interested you in 4 bridges in Italy that you probably never heard of, and you can see how important they've played a part in the campaign for Italy. And I've introduced you to 4 characters, all madly British, all Maz box of frogs. Are there any questions?